The first time my ex-husband came looking for my son, he didn't know there was no son for him to find. He had spent nearly 10 years believing one ugly lie, and when the truth finally caught up with him, he crossed state lines, dug through old records, searched my name online, and showed up like a ghost from a life I had buried long ago. But the cruelest part was not that he came back. The cruelest part was that years earlier when I was pregnant, terrified and begging him to believe me, he chose another woman's lie over his own wife. Back then, I was 24 years old, newly married, and convinced I had found the kind of love people spend their whole lives searching for. His name was Nolan Whitaker. He was charming in that confident Southern way, the kind of man who could walk into a neighborhood barbecue in Nashville and leave with 3 new friends, 2 job offers, and someone's grandmother insisting he take home a plate of ribs. I had moved from Ohio to Tennessee for work, young enough to think starting over in a new city would be exciting instead of lonely. My best friend had moved with me at first, but 6 months later she got her dream job back home. I told her to take it because that was what good friends did. Then I watched her drive away and realized I knew almost no one in the entire state. Nolan appeared in my life 2 weeks later. I met him at a friend of a friend cookout on a warm Saturday evening, the kind of backyard gathering where kids ran barefoot through sprinklers, men argued over college football, and women passed around paper plates loaded with potato salad and deviled eggs. He had just gotten out of a long relationship with his high school sweetheart, and I had just been left alone in a city that still felt too big and too unfamiliar. Maybe we were both lonely. Maybe we both mistook intensity for destiny. Within a month, he was staying at my apartment almost every night. Within 3 months, his toothbrush was beside mine. Within 8 months, he proposed without a ring, and I thought it was romantic because I was too in love to ask why he seemed in such a hurry. Her name was Brooke Hensley. She was Nolan's ex-girlfriend, though in his family she was treated more like unfinished business. Their mothers went to the same church, volunteered at the same charity drives, and had apparently been planning Nolan and Brooke's wedding since middle school. Brooke was pretty in a polished, familiar way, with blonde hair, perfect manners, and the kind of smile that never reached her eyes when she looked at me. The first time I met her was at Nolan's college graduation party. She hugged his mother first, then Nolan, then stood close enough to him in every picture that anyone scrolling through Facebook would have assumed she was still his girlfriend. I told myself not to be insecure. In American families, especially close Southern families, old history can linger. People stay friends with exes. Mothers keep sentimental attachments. Churches, schools, neighborhoods, and family friends all overlap until everybody knows everybody's business. That was what I told myself every time Brooke touched Nolan's arm during a family dinner, every time she called him by a childhood nickname, every time his mother compared my cooking to Brooke's, or mentioned that Brooke already knew all their Thanksgiving traditions. I smiled through it because I wanted to be accepted. I wanted to be the kind of wife who did not make drama. More than anything, I wanted to believe. Nolan, when he came home, pulled me close and said Brooke meant nothing. Our wedding should have been the day I understood the truth. Brooke wore ivory, not bright bridal white, but close enough that everyone noticed, and no one said a word. She cried during the ceremony like she had lost something. At the reception, she danced with Nolan almost as much as I did. His mother kept introducing her to my relatives as basically family, which made me feel like a guest at my own wedding. Still, I ignored the humiliation because my own family had traveled from Ohio, and I did not want to ruin the day. My stepbrother Caleb was there too. He was only a year older than me, and we had grown up so close that most people assumed we were biological siblings. He hugged me, teased me, fixed my veil when it got caught on a chair, and danced with me during one of the fast songs because he knew I was trying not to cry. That innocent closeness became the seed Brooke planted in Nolan's mind. For the next 2 years, my marriage became a quiet competition I never agreed to enter. Brooke was at birthday dinners, 4th of July, cookouts, baby showers, Christmas Eve services, and Sunday lunches after church. Nolan always said he couldn't cut her off because it would hurt his mother. His mother always acted like I was temporary, and Brooke was inevitable. I worked hard, kept our apartment clean, remembered everyone's birthdays, brought casseroles to church potlucks, and tried to become part of a family that had already reserved my place for someone else. Then I got pregnant. I found out on a Wednesday morning before work. I still remember standing barefoot on the bathroom tile, staring at the test while my hands shook. Nolan had always talked about wanting a big family. He wanted backyard birthday parties, little league games, Christmas mornings with kids in matching pajamas. I thought this baby would finally make us feel like a real family. I bought a tiny pair of yellow baby socks and placed them in a gift bag with the pregnancy test. That evening, when Nolan came home, I handed him the bag and waited for joy. He didn't smile. He looked at the socks, then at the test, and his face changed in a way I had never seen before. It was not shock. It was suspicion. His first words were not, "Are you serious?" or "I'm going to be a dad." His first words were, "She said this would happen." I thought I had misheard him. I asked what he meant, but he would not explain. He walked out of our apartment and did not answer my calls that night. I stayed awake until sunrise, one hand pressed against my stomach, telling myself he was overwhelmed and would come home apologizing. Instead, he returned the next morning with cold eyes and two options: end the pregnancy or accept a divorce. When he finally told me what Brooke had said, I felt like the floor disappeared under me. She had convinced him that my stepbrother Caleb and I were too close at the wedding, that our hugs were strange, that our family photos looked inappropriate, that I had gone back to Ohio months later, not to visit my mother for her 60th birthday, but to be with Caleb. And because I came home pregnant soon after that trip, Brooke said the baby was not Nolan's. I offered medical records. I offered a paternity test. I cried until my throat hurt. But Nolan did not want proof. He wanted permission to believe the woman his family had chosen before me. So I packed my life into suitcases, called my mother, requested a transfer through my job, and left Tennessee with a broken marriage, a shaking heart, and a baby I was determined to protect from everyone who had already rejected them. Coming home to Ohio should have felt like safety, but at first it only felt like failure. My mother picked me up from the small airport outside Columbus on a gray afternoon, and the moment I saw her standing near baggage claim in her old winter coat, I broke down so hard I could barely breathe. She didn't ask questions in front of strangers. She just wrapped both arms around me, held the back of my head like I was a child again, and whispered that I was home now. For the first time in weeks, I believed I might survive. The divorce moved faster than I expected. Nolan's mother had insisted on a prenuptial agreement before our wedding, probably because she never truly believed I belonged in the family. At the time, it had hurt me. Later, it became a strange blessing. We had no house together, no children born yet, and no shared savings worth fighting over. Nolan refused a paternity test. He refused every chance to know the truth. Through his attorney, he signed away any claim to the baby he insisted was not his. I remember sitting in a quiet legal office with fluorescent lights buzzing above me, staring at the papers, and wondering how a man could throw away his own child because another woman told him to. I tried to be strong after that. I moved back into my mother and stepfather's house, took a transfer to a local branch of the company I worked for, and told everyone who asked that my marriage had ended because it was unhealthy. That was the polite American answer, the one people could accept at church, at the grocery store, at family dinners. I did not tell them that my husband had accused me of sleeping with my stepbrother. I did not tell them he had demanded that I end my pregnancy. I did not tell them that every time I looked at my own stomach, I felt both love and terror. For a few months, I focused on small things. Prenatal vitamins on the kitchen counter. Doctor appointments written on the refrigerator calendar. My mother buying tiny blankets even though I begged her not to get too excited yet. Caleb coming over after work with takeout and pretending everything was normal even though I could see the guilt in his eyes. He had done nothing wrong, but Brooke's lie had dragged his name into something disgusting. And he carried that insult quietly, because he loved me too much to make my pain about him. Then one night, the cramps started. I will not describe every detail because some grief does not need decoration. I will only say that by morning, the future I had been holding onto was gone. The baby Nolan rejected the baby I had crossed state lines to protect, never got the chance to take a breath. The doctors were kind. My mother was devastated. Caleb cried in the hallway where he thought I could not hear him. I went home with empty arms and a silence inside me that made every room feel too large. After that, I stopped thinking of Nolan as my ex-husband and started thinking of him as a closed door. I did not call him. I did not write to him. I did not tell him what happened. Some people might say he deserved to know, but I could not carry one more moment of being doubted by him. He had chosen his truth. He had signed away his rights. He had walked out before the child was even born. In my heart, that chapter ended in the hospital room where I learned there would be no baby to fight over. Years passed because that is what years do. They move forward even when people are standing still. I built a quiet life. I rented a little townhouse, adopted an old orange cat, worked my way into a better position, and started joining my mother for Saturday breakfast again at the same diner where the waitress already knew our coffee orders. I became the woman everyone said was doing better, even though some nights I still woke up from dreams where Nolan looked at me like I was guilty. I met Daniel Mercer at a school fundraiser of all places. My cousin was a teacher and had begged me to help run a raffle table during a fall festival. Daniel was a widower with a 6-year-old son named Miles, a shy little boy with red hair, serious eyes, and a habit of hiding behind his father's leg when too many adults spoke to him. Daniel was not flashy like Nolan. He did not fill a room with charm. He was steady. He listened before he answered. He said thank you to cafeteria workers. He carried extra juice boxes in his truck because Miles was always thirsty after soccer practice. We became friends first. Then slowly, carefully, something warmer grew between us. I told Daniel I had been married before and that it ended badly. I told him I had lost a pregnancy. I did not tell him every ugly detail, not because I wanted to deceive him, but because speaking Nolan's name felt like inviting poison back into my home. Daniel never pushed. He simply said everyone had locked rooms inside them, and love did not require kicking down every door at once. Miles was the surprise I never expected. At first, he called me Miss Claire, then Claire. Then one sleepy Sunday morning after pancakes, he leaned against my shoulder and called me Mom by accident. I froze, afraid Daniel would be uncomfortable, but Daniel only looked at us with tears in his eyes. 2 years after our wedding, I adopted Miles legally. On paper, he became my son. In my heart, he already had been. Miles had my red hair by coincidence, a bright copper shade that made strangers smile and say, "Well, there's no denying he's yours." I never corrected them unless I had to. Blood had stopped being the measure of family for me a long time ago. Family was who stayed. Family was who believed you when your voice shook. Family was who sat beside you in the wreckage and helped you build something livable again. For almost 10 years, Nolan remained exactly where I wanted him in the past. No calls, no emails, no messages, no accidental run-ins. I thought Brooke had won whatever game she had been playing and that he had returned to the life his mother wanted for him. I thought he would never know about the miscarriage. I thought he would never care. Then one afternoon, an old Tennessee acquaintance sent me a message that made my hands go cold. Nolan was asking about me. And worse, he was asking about my child. At first, I told myself not to panic. People ask about old acquaintances all the time. Maybe Nolan had seen my name somewhere. Maybe someone from Tennessee had mentioned that I was married again. Maybe he was just curious in the empty, harmless way some people become curious when their own lives do not turn out the way they imagined. But the message from my old acquaintance was too specific to ignore. Nolan was not just asking where I lived. He was asking whether I had a son, how old the boy was, what his name might be, and whether the child had red hair. I sat at my kitchen table staring at that message, while Miles worked on a science project in the next room. He was building a model of the solar system out of foam balls and fishing line, humming to himself, while Daniel helped him paint Jupiter. It was such an ordinary American family evening takeout containers on the counter. A school backpack by the door, the local news playing quietly from the living room television. And suddenly, the past was standing in the middle of it. Filthy shoes on my clean floor. I did not tell Daniel right away, and I am not proud of that. Part of me was embarrassed. Part of me was afraid he would look at me differently once he knew the full story. I had told him about the miscarriage, but not about Brooke's accusation. I had never said out loud that my first husband believed I had betrayed him with my own stepbrother. Even though I knew I had done nothing wrong, shame has a cruel way of clinging to innocent people. So, I locked my phone, finished the dishes, kissed Miles goodnight, and spent the rest of the evening pretending my hands were not shaking. The first follow request came the next morning. Nolan's name appeared on my private Instagram account like a warning light. Then Facebook. Then LinkedIn. Then another Instagram account I barely used. By lunch, he had found nearly every corner of my online life. He had not messaged me yet, but I could see him circling. I blocked each account one by one, feeling ridiculous and terrified at the same time. This was a man I had not seen in nearly a decade. A man who had signed papers walking away from the child I was carrying. A man who had once decided I was guilty because Brooke whispered poison into his ear. That evening, I told Daniel everything. I expected anger. I expected questions. I expected him to ask why I had kept so much from him. Instead, he listened. He sat beside me on the couch after Miles went to bed, one hand wrapped around mine, silent, while I told the story from the beginning. Nashville. Brooke. The wedding. Caleb. The pregnancy test. Nolan's cold ultimatum. The divorce. The miscarriage. I cried harder than I wanted to, not because I still loved Nolan, but because saying it all out loud made me realize how much of myself I had buried just to keep functioning. When I finished, Daniel did not let go of my hand. He only said that none of it was my fault and that Nolan would not be allowed to bring chaos into our home. There was no jealousy in his voice, no judgment, just steadiness. That was Daniel. He did not need to be loud to make me feel protected. For 2 days blocking, Nolan seemed to work. Then the fake accounts began. The first message was short. He said he knew he had made mistakes and wanted a Katak to Vangs. Kathesed was longer. He said Brooke had finally confessed that she lied. The third message mentioned our son. After that, every message became more desperate. He said he had the right to know his child. He said a boy deserved his biological father. He said Daniel might be a decent man, but no stepfather could replace blood. That sentence made me feel sick, because Miles was not Daniel's stepson to me. Miles was my son in every way that mattered. Nolan did not even understand the child he was chasing. Daniel and I saved every message. We did not respond. We tightened privacy settings, told my mother and Caleb not to give out information, and warned Miles's school that no one outside our approved pickup list was allowed near him. I hated having to do that. I hated turning our life into a checklist of precautions. But the messages kept coming, and each one made it clearer that Nolan was not accepting silence. Then he found my mother's house. It happened on a Saturday morning. I visited my mother almost every weekend, usually with Miles, but that day he had slept over at a friend's house after a birthday party. I went alone, planning to drink coffee with my mother and help her sort through boxes in the garage. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed a dark sedan parked across the street. I barely looked at it until the driver's door opened. Nolan stepped out. For a few seconds, my mind refused to recognize him. He looked older, thinner, more worn down than the man I had married, but the way he walked toward me brought everything back at once. The apartment in Nashville, the baby socks, the cold voice telling me to choose between divorce and ending my pregnancy. My first instinct was fear. My second was rage. He said my name like we were two old friends meeting by accident. I told him to leave. He raised both hands as if he were the reasonable one. He said he only wanted to see his son. He said Brooke had admitted everything before her own wedding fell apart, that she had lied because she never got over him, that he had been manipulated and deserved a chance to make things right. He said he had suffered too. He said he had spent years robbed of fatherhood. That was when something inside me snapped. I told him he had not been robbed. He had thrown fatherhood away. He had been offered proof and rejected it. He had abandoned a pregnant wife because another woman bruised his pride. And then I gave him the truth he had traveled all that way to hear. There was no child for him to meet. The baby was gone before it ever had a name. The stress, the divorce, the move, and the grief had all crashed down on my body until there was nothing left to protect. Miles was Daniel's son by birth, and mine by love adoption and every bedtime story I had ever read to him. Nolan had no son. He had no claim. He had only the consequences of the choice he made. By then, my mother had come out onto the porch, and half the neighborhood was pretending not to watch from behind curtains. Nolan looked stunned, but I could not tell whether it was grief, disbelief, or anger. When my stepfather told him it was time to leave, Nolan finally backed away. I wanted to believe that the truth would end it. I should have known better. For 3 days after Nolan left my mother's house, I convinced myself the nightmare was over. I wanted to believe that hearing the truth had finally broken through whatever fantasy he had built in his head. There was no biological son waiting for him. There was no stolen childhood to reclaim. There was no heroic father returning after years of being deceived. There was only a man who had abandoned his pregnant wife, refused proof when it was offered, and arrived 10 years too late, demanding a child who had never lived. But Nolan had never been good at believing me. The first time I saw his car after that Saturday, I thought it was coincidence. I was leaving work carrying my laptop bag and a half-finished iced coffee when I noticed a dark sedan parked near the far end of the lot. The windows were tinted, and the car pulled away before I could see the driver clearly. I told myself I was paranoid. Then Daniel saw the same car 2 nights later near our street. My mother saw it outside her church after Wednesday Bible study. Caleb spotted it near the grocery store where he sometimes picked up dinner after work. One sighting could be fear playing tricks. 4 sightings felt like a warning. Daniel installed cameras outside our house that weekend. He was calm about it, but I could see the tightness in his jaw when he checked the locks before bed. We told Miles it was just extra security because there had been some break-ins in town. He accepted that explanation the way children accept adult answers when they sense asking more questions might make the room heavier. I hated that. I hated that Nolan had reached into the safe little world Daniel and I had built and made our son look over his shoulder. We went to the police with screenshots, fake account messages, photos of the sedan, and a written record of every time we had seen him. The officer who took the report was polite but careful. He said the behavior was concerning, but unless Nolan threatened us, directly trespassed, or attempted contact in a way that clearly violated the law, there was only so much they could do. They advised us to keep documenting everything and call immediately if he appeared at our home, Miles's school, or my workplace. It was the kind of answer that sounded reasonable until you were the one being watched. That evening, Daniel and I sat at the kitchen table after Miles went to bed and made a list of every place Nolan might try to reach him. School, soccer practice, the public library, my mother's house, the diner where we ate Saturday breakfast. It made me sick how normal the list was. These were not dangerous places. They were the pieces of an ordinary childhood. A school hallway lined with construction paper art, a soccer field with muddy cleats and folding chairs, a library corner with beanbags and summer reading posters. Nolan had turned all of it into a map of possible threats. The next morning, we went to Miles's elementary school and asked to speak with the principal. Sitting in that small office with motivational posters on the walls, I explained more than I wanted to. I told them a man from my past might attempt to contact my son. I showed them Nolan's picture. Daniel gave them a written list of approved adults, him, me, my mother, Caleb, and our neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who taught 3rd grade in the same building. No one else was allowed to pick Miles up for any reason, no matter what story they told. The principal took it seriously. So did the front office secretary, a sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Alvarez, who had worked in schools long enough to spot trouble before it signed in at the desk. She made extra copies of Nolan's photo and quietly alerted the staff. Mrs. Patterson promised she would keep an eye on Miles without scaring him. For the first time in days, I felt like we were not completely alone. Then Nolan made his move. It happened on a Thursday afternoon just before dismissal. Nolan walked into the school office wearing khakis and a navy jacket, looking polished enough to pass for a concerned relative. He told Mrs. Alvarez he was there to pick up Miles Mercer because there had been an emergency with Miles's grandmother. He used my mother's real first name. He said I had asked him to come because Daniel was stuck at work and I was already on my way to the hospital. Mrs. Alvarez did exactly what we had prayed she would do. She smiled, politely asked for his ID, and told him she would need to call me before releasing Miles. Nolan pushed harder. He said there was no time. He said I was too upset to answer the phone. He said Miles needed to leave immediately. When Mrs. Alvarez still refused, his mask slipped. Not completely, but enough. His voice sharpened. He leaned over the counter. He said he was the boy's real father and had every right to take him. By then, the office camera had captured everything. Mrs. Alvarez told him she would get the principal. Instead, she pressed the silent alert button under her desk and called my phone the second Nolan stepped outside. He did not leave the property. He went to his car and waited near the pickup lane. When my phone rang, I was at work. I remember seeing the school's number and feeling my stomach drop before I even answered. Mrs. Alvarez spoke quickly, but her voice stayed steady. She told me Miles was safe, that Mrs. Patterson had already pulled him from his classroom before dismissal and that the police were on their way. Daniel and I drove there so fast I barely remember the road. By the time we arrived, 2 police cars were parked behind Nolan's sedan. He was standing near the driver's door arguing with an officer, while another officer searched the car. I saw his face when he noticed me. There was no shame in it, only anger, like I had ruined his plan instead of protecting my child. Then one of the officers opened the trunk. Inside, they found a small suitcase, 2 one-way plane tickets to Tennessee, a prepaid phone cash, and a bottle of strong prescription sedatives with Nolan's name on the label. Later, he would claim the medication was for his anxiety. Maybe it was, but no one could explain why a man who had no legal right to my son had arrived at his school with plane tickets, cash, and a lie about a family emergency. Nolan was arrested in the school parking lot while parents slowed their cars and stared. Miles never saw him. Mrs. Patterson kept him in her classroom, letting him finish a puzzle while the worst moment of our lives unfolded outside. That night, after we finally brought Miles home, he asked why I was crying. I pulled him close and told him I was just happy he was safe. And for the first time in weeks, that was almost true. For a long time, I thought peace would feel dramatic when it finally came. I imagined some grand moment where the past would crack open, justice would step out, and I would feel every broken piece of myself fall back into place. But real peace did not arrive like thunder. It came quietly in ordinary pieces. It came in the sound of Miles laughing at the kitchen table. It came in Daniel locking the front door at night without checking it 3 extra times. It came in the first morning I drove to work without scanning every parked car along the street. Nolan did not disappear immediately, but this time he could not talk his way out of what he had done. The school footage showed him lying to the office staff, claiming a family emergency, and insisting he had the right to take Miles. The plane tickets were real. The cash was real. The prepaid phone was real. The sedatives were real, even if he tried to explain them away as medication for his own panic attacks. His attorney argued that he was a grieving man who had been manipulated, a father desperate to reconnect with the child stolen from him. But there was one problem with that story. Miles was not his child. During the legal process, the truth was documented in a way Nolan could no longer twist. Daniel was Miles's biological father. I was Miles's legal mother through adoption. Nolan had no biological connection, no parental rights, no legal claim, and no reasonable excuse for showing up at an elementary school with a plan to take a child across state lines. My medical records were also submitted with my consent, confirming what I had told him outside my mother's house. The baby from my first marriage had been lost years earlier. Nolan had not been deprived of a son. He had destroyed his own marriage over a lie, then nearly destroyed another family because he could not accept the truth. The day of the hearing, I sat beside Daniel, with my hands folded so tightly my fingers ached. Nolan looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically exactly, but in spirit. The confidence was gone. The polished Southern charm was gone. He looked like a man who had spent years blaming everyone else and had finally run out of people to blame. When he glanced toward me, I did not look away. I had looked away too many times in Nashville. I had swallowed too much humiliation, smiled through too many insults, accepted too many explanations that made me smaller. Not anymore. Brooke showed up too. Of course she did. She came dressed like she was attending a funeral for herself, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue even when no tears fell. I almost laughed when I saw her. This was the woman who had started everything, with whispers at my wedding, who had studied family photos and turned normal affection into something dirty, who had poisoned Nolan's mind because she wanted a life that was never hers to steal. And now, she sat behind him, looking heartbroken, as if she were the tragic heroine in a story she had written with other people's pain. Her own life unraveled soon after. Word spread quickly because in towns like Nolan's, secrets travel faster than Sunday gossip after church. Brooke's husband learned that she had not only lied about me years ago, but had remained emotionally tangled with Nolan the entire time. Some people said she had been visiting him before his arrest. Others said she had been posting online about standing by him. I did not care enough to confirm every detail. All I know is that her husband filed for divorce. Her friends stopped defending her, and the woman who once acted like she had won ended up with exactly what she had fought for Nolan, behind bars with nothing left to offer her but shame. Nolan received prison time. Not forever, though part of me wished it had been, but long enough. Long enough for Miles to grow older without seeing his face outside a school window. Long enough for Daniel and me to breathe. Long enough for my family to stop jumping every time an unfamiliar car slowed near the house. We also received protective orders for me, Daniel, Miles, my mother, and Caleb. Nolan would not be allowed near our home, our workplaces, Miles's school, or any place we regularly visited. For the first time since that first message from Tennessee, the law finally stood between us and him. After the sentencing, I expected to feel victorious. Instead, I felt tired. Deeply, completely tired. There is a kind of exhaustion that comes after surviving something nobody should have put you through in the first place. Daniel drove us home in silence, one hand resting on mine. When we pulled into the driveway, Miles ran out to meet us wearing a superhero cape over his school clothes because he had decided Thursday was a good day to be brave. He threw his arms around my waist and asked if we could order pizza for dinner. I cried again then, but this time it did not feel like fear. That night, after Miles fell asleep, I sat on the edge of his bed and watched the soft rise and fall of his breathing. He was not the child Nolan abandoned. He was not a replacement for the baby I lost. He was himself. Miss Son, Daniel's son, a child surrounded by people who chose him every single day. And maybe that was the lesson Nolan never understood. Family is not something you can claim just because you want it. Family is built by trust, by presence, by protection, by love that shows up when it matters. Nolan had blood once, and he threw it away. Daniel had love, and he stayed. As for me, I stopped wondering whether Nolan ever truly loved me. Some questions do not deserve a lifetime of searching. What mattered was that I had survived him. I had survived Brooke's lie, his cruelty, the loss that followed, and the fear he brought back to my doorstep years later. I had built a home from ashes, and when the past came hunting for it, we protected it together. Now, when people say Miles has my red hair, I just smile. Because sometimes family is not about who gave you life. Sometimes family is about who makes you feel safe enough to live it.